Hi, my name is Gina Irwin, and today I'll be presenting a case study that examines three countries, the United States, China, and Canada, to explore how cultural diversity and equity manifest in education. By investigating, analyzing, comparing, and contrasting these three countries, my goal is to provide a comprehensive understanding of their characteristics and how they impact equity in education. This study will highlight key insights and implications for future practice. Here's just a brief overview of the things I'll be talking about today with regards to the case study of United States, Canada, and China. First of all, the education systems. We'll take a look at each of those and outline the differences and similarities. Secondly, we'll be looking at some policies and practices in each country that promote equity. The third thing we'll be doing is taking a look at one particular problem of practice, which is class size, and look at the three countries and see how the implications are for class size in those three countries. Next, we'll look at underrepresented groups in the three countries, strengths and limitations, and lastly, recommendations. The education system in the United States, it's comprised of 12 years of compulsory education, free and public education for kinder through 12th grade. The school day is about 7 hours, 180 days per year. While there is federal oversight in the public education system, there's also quite a bit of state and district authority. Curriculum is based on broad frameworks, but is individualized by state based on the Common Core, generally Common Core standards. And schools in the United States can be public, private, charter, or there are homeschool options. Now we can look at the basic framework of the educational system in Canada, which is much like the United States. There's 12 years of compulsory education, free and public education from kinder through 12th grade. The school day is similar, about 6 to 7 hours, with about 190 instructional days per year. The big difference between the US and Canada is that the education system is decentralized. There's no federal control. The control is up to individual provinces. Also, there's provincial responsibility for curriculum. And lastly, there are options similar to the United States for schools, public, private, and homeschool. There are no charter school options in Canada. Next, we'll take a look at the educational system in China. China is the largest education system in the world. It is made up of 9 years of free compulsory education, and then the additional 3 years in upper secondary education is tuition based. So that is different from both the US and Canada. Those 3 years are no longer free, that is tuition based. The school day is a bit longer than the US and Canada at 9 hours and 245 instructional days per year. China does have a standardized curriculum across the country, and the only options in China are public and private schools. So we can take a look at some of the key policies and practices in the United States that promote equity. The first one might be controversial, but standardized testing might be able to highlight disparities in learning and help identify groups of students that need additional support. Secondly, I wanted to just bring up the individualized education plans from 1975. So students with special needs do benefit from their individualized education plans to support their individual needs, which is a huge step towards equity with students with special needs. The Every Student Succeeds Act is also intended to provide all students with access to an education. And lastly, the Individuals with Disabilities Act of 1975 was a huge step forward for the United States and continues to provide an equitable education for students with disabilities. One trend that I am noticing in all three of the countries is the focus to expand access to early childhood education. Next, we can take a look at the key policies and practices relating to equity in Canada. The testing is under provincial jurisdiction. So this gives them a little bit in each province, a little bit more flexibility to tailor testing based on local needs. The other policy that relates to equity is Canada also has individualized education plans or IEPs for students with special needs. And one example of an equity initiative was in a province, and it's called Ontario Student Success Strategy, which focuses on identifying potential dropouts early on and then providing them with the individual support that they need to graduate. So this is an example of how a province can address student needs and take action on a more local level. The last one again is that trend is countries in the OECD countries are focusing on expanding access to early childhood education. Next, I wanted to highlight some key policies and practices that promote equity in China. And the first one is the compulsory education law in 1986. Prior to that, education in China was largely limited to the elite and also favored the male population. So this compulsory education law enacted in 1986 was a huge step forward with regards to equity in China. The second thing is that they have worked on desegregating students with disabilities. So previously, before the 1998 Learning in the Regular Classroom, they had special schools for students with disabilities. So now the trend is more towards learning in the regular classroom, much like the United States and Canada. And lastly, again, China is also focusing on expanding access to early childhood education. Take a look at class size between the three countries and some of the implications of class size on student learning and overall educational outcomes. So the United States is the average class size is 21, Canada slightly larger at 26, and China significantly larger with class sizes between 40 and 60 students. The average of all of the OECD countries is 21. As we look at the differences in class size between the three countries, there's some implications of smaller versus larger class size. In a smaller class size, you do have more opportunities for individualized learning, more differentiation, more small groups, more one-on-one instruction, one-on-one support, and more getting to know the students and getting to know their individualized needs. I also think that student engagement would be higher in a smaller classroom setting. Classroom management would look a lot different in a smaller classroom of 21 versus a classroom of 40 or more. Also, the implications of class size on teacher effectiveness and workload and working conditions are a big factor to consider. Also, social emotional learning seems to be much more beneficial in a smaller class size. Let's take a brief look at the different underrepresented groups, as well as the similarities between the three countries. So in the United States, students of color and students with lower socioeconomic status, language status, and students with disabilities are all considered considerable underrepresented groups. In Canada, Indigenous students, Black and Latin Canadians. Canada has a very high population of immigrants, as well as students with disabilities. And in China, the two main groups, although there's overlap with all those groups I mentioned before, but the two main groups that China struggles with regards to equity is those of lower socioeconomic status and female students. Strengths and limitations within each country. Strengths of the United States, we do have smaller class sizes, more in line with the average of the 38 OECD countries. We have undergone desegregation and increased attention to the resource allocation to high needs groups and schools. We've increased funding to lower achieving schools. There's more focus on social emotional learning. And we've made improvements in closing the achievement gap for many underrepresented groups. Some of the limitations or opportunities for the United States are to further close the achievement gaps. Although we've come a long way in the fight for equity, the reality of today is that there are still existing barriers. And the achievement gap still exists, particularly with students of color, English language learners, and students with disabilities. Despite funding initiatives, there are still high need schools with inadequate funding and support. There's a shortage of highly qualified teachers, especially in low income areas where they are needed the most. Teachers are also in desperate need of training in areas to meet the needs of our diverse population. Some examples of this training would be evidence-based literacy instruction, anti-bias training, professional development in culturally responsive teaching, and social emotional learning. Now we can talk about some of the strengths with Canada. Canada has had some great success with the high immigrant student achievement compared to their non-immigrant peers. The provincial jurisdiction over curriculum and funding policies provide opportunities to tailor the needs to geographical areas. The same with control over funding is more on a provincial level, so they have more opportunities to address the needs of local areas. And Canada's reputation for supporting all students is right in line with equity initiatives. Although Canada has made tremendous efforts to provide a high quality education to all the students, they do still have some areas of opportunity. One underrepresented group that still faces many barriers is Indigenous students, particularly those that live on a reserve. The local jurisdiction over curriculum and funding policies, although they provide opportunities to tailor to the needs of geographical areas, they may be limiting in that it leaves certain areas open for disparities of resources and performance between provinces. Canada's class size is also higher than the average according to the OECD, which may be an opportunity for Canada to consider smaller class sizes, offering many benefits with regards to equity. China has a very strong reputation of strong academic success on those standardized high-stakes tests. China also has a standardized curriculum, which has benefits of being that the students across the country are receiving the same education despite their geographic location or socioeconomic status or their background. Compulsory education has also improved greatly in the last 45 years with the compulsory education law. And China has also made great advances in closing the achievement gap between male and female students. Although China performs well on the test, the high-stakes testing is a concern for the overall well-being and education of students. This approach could be taking a toll on creativity, critical thinking, as well as the inclination of students to continue on to higher education. Also, a standardized curriculum may not offer the same opportunities to provide culturally relevant and responsive teaching. The larger class sizes also are of a concern as they prevent differentiation and individualized learning. The class size may also negatively impact teacher quality and satisfaction, which exacerbate the teacher shortage and situation in those more rural areas. And also, upper secondary education in China offers a choice of regular, senior, high school, or vocational school. However, these 3 additional years are not free. Students must pay tuition, which may put a hardship on families. Although enrollment today in compulsory education is not significantly different between males and females, there's still an impact on females. According to the OECD, the share of women who have obtained a bachelor's degree or equivalent is just 8%, which makes China 41st out of 46 countries. I have some recommendations for future practice to promote equity further for these 3 countries, as well as these really could translate globally. Early childhood education should continue to be a focus to help mitigate the impact that socioeconomic status, race, and language status have on a quality education. We should continue the focus on equitable resource distribution and making sure that high needs schools have the funding and the resources that they need. Controlling class size would offer more personalized instruction, reduction of teacher workload, deeper connections with students and their families, and increased effectiveness of classroom management. Teachers need to be trained on how to provide culturally responsive teaching, trained on how to identify implicit bias, and also be given significant input on the design of curriculum. Policy changes, policy advocacy should include community involvement and should continue to focus on improving schools with low performance records and those that serve disadvantaged populations.